So I had a bunch of slides for this initially, and I was like, really all you need to know is just kind of what these two things are, feedback and fractals, and then we can just kind of jump into a demo. Howdy. Yeah, so feedback is has a couple different definitions. The one we really care about for this type of thing and what we'll be going over today is taking the input, plugging in the output of a machine or system or process into the input, right? And so what you get is sort of like a loop that's happening. And it's super useful in all sorts of different fields, like circuits and machinery, and like that's how air conditioners work. It's a feedback loop that tries to normalize. But for this, we're kind of going to be doing that, but to make like pretty fractals and stuff. And so what a fractal is a geometric shape that is self-similar at different scales. So it kind of repeats, and if you zoom in or zoom out, it kind of looks like the same thing. On kind of like on average, the amount of information there is the same, and it has a technical math definition too. And so maybe what we're doing is not strictly mathematically a fractal, but visually it is. So we can jump into demo. This is Hydra. You really just go to this URL, pull it up. I know the Wi-Fi is pretty bad here, but the big thing is this little page that pops up. If you scroll down, there's an interactive documentation and a list of Hydra functions, and those are your best friends when you're learning this stuff. The documentation is really great, and this reference has just like a list of all the functions, like the sources, which are kind of your starting places, and then the effects that you can apply to them, and ways to combine sources. And so kind of where we'll start is from a blank thing. Right, so you have these sources, and I guess who's familiar with JavaScript? Cool. So really all you need to know is like this is, you're referencing something that has a name, and you kind of just can group together these settings. And then at the very end of it, whatever you need to do, like you kind of chain things together with this dot syntax. At the very end of everything that you do, you have to say out in order for it to go out. So this OSC is like an oscillator. It's kind of a sine wave that's moving between colors, and it creates a smooth effect. And some of the settings can change things like the number of kind of peaks on the screen, the speed of what's going on, and then the sync is the last one's sync. It's kind of just color. Because these sine waves are kind of like desynced.
Where are you trying to play?
Oh yeah, so Control-Shift-Enter runs the entire thing. Control-Enter runs one line of code. Usually I just do the whole thing, right? And so if we want to get started with feedback, there is something that's important to know is that when you're calling out, what it's actually writing to is this named thing called O0, and you kind of have like 4 of these, and if we do render, that'll just kind of show you all of them. So if I do the 4th one, you'll see it pops up here, or maybe it's the 3rd one, yeah, indexed by 0. And so this is sort of rendering all 4 of your outputs, and that's a good way to kind of debug what's going on sometimes. If we do like shape 4 here, you can see it changes that. But yeah, so that's good to know. These are called outputs. It's kind of just a place to send sort of the texture that you're working on. And it's the key to being able to do feedback, right? So there is this source function, and it's a source, but it's sort of taking a texture and making it into like a usable thing in Hydra. So if we say source 0, we're actually saying like take the output and make it an input. And so that is how we get feedback. And the key part of doing that is like if you take what's going out and putting it in just by itself, nothing's going to happen. It's not moving. It's not doing anything interesting. It's just going to keep what is on the screen there. And so that's why we currently see the square still, even though I got rid of that shape call. And so we can use our blending functions to do things on top of the feedback. So we could do like blend is one thing, and so that's not really going to do anything. But if we make this thing move around with scroll X, and then we make the blend be kind of a lower number, you can see it kind of creates this like trail effect, right? And that's because it's blending it with each previous frame, and so you get the overlapping like kind of input from all the previous states. And so that's cool, like especially if you want to make like a kind of a smoky like effect or a kind of trail effect. And so all of these different blending functions can do different things. For example, if we're working in a shape, we can layer. Maybe a good way to think about this is these are all just kind of like Photoshop layers. Those are kind of the way of, the blend modes. And so layer is one that is pretty good, but if you see like this, it's not doing anything yet, and that's because shape and a lot of, hey Benji, a lot of the sort of, a lot of these things don't have a transparency to them. That's like this black here is actually the color black. So you need to actually specifically tell it to use the luminosity as transparency, which is sort of just hard to explain from a mathematical perspective, but all you really need to know is that if it's kind of bright, then it will be treated as keeping it as how it is, and if it's dark, it'll turn into transparency. So now if we do that, then you see this thing starts to kind of trail behind it. And that the layering stuff is kind of the most like vivid version of feedback. There's also like diff, which is really like flashy, glitchy, but it's also a lot of fun. It's probably one of the ones I use more, just because you can get sort of the fractal stuff that we'll get into next. It just does that better because it's not like destructive, right? Like the blend mode, like it is kind of destructive. It like, as it layers on, it sort of starts to disappear, right? So let's go back to layer. So at this point in feedback, like there's a lot of things you can do. This is really kind of the key to getting like interesting, like more transcendent effects than just like sort of the geometric stuff. So if we kind of make this thing go all around the screen with scroll X and scroll Y, these are just like speed parameters, like offset and speed. And so if you kind of make them relatively prime numbers, this thing will follow a more interesting path along the screen. But the fun part with feedback is when you start to get do things with it, like nudge it around and move it. So there's this idea of modulation in Hydra, right? And that's another way of combining textures. But you're essentially saying, I want to use this texture input, like noise, for example, to control the parameter per point on the screen, right? So it's like kind of hard to explain and is really just easier to see. So if we make it kind of like a small noise and then we give it like a small number here just because modulate, the big thing is a lot of these things are, can get really very chaotic very quickly because it's actually the definition of chaos is these feedback systems, mathematical chaos at least. But if we run this, we get like nice, like kind of smooth, like flowing things. And that's just because this noise is nudging around the feedback. And yeah, so it just gets pushed around, and there's a bunch of different ones you can do, like scale is pretty cool too. And they have like different kind of looks to them. And really it's just about kind of playing around with it and finding things that look cool and spaces that are interesting. But the big thing is like if you make it too much, it turns into noise, which can look cool, but it's a little bit, it's not as like smooth and interesting as kind of the small numbers. And all of these things have like sweet spots to them where it's like, yeah, you get the interesting stuff and sort of an important point is that, you know, each one of these kind of sections you can go further in. Like if I want to add some color to this, I can be like, just mask the square. And then we get some fun colors going on. And so that OSC is creating the color, and then we're applying a mask that is the shape, which is a square, or we can make it like a triangle. It can look cool too. This one in particular, diff, looks really like cool with this mode of like color shifting, because it keeps doing a difference of the color and gets into all these kind of glitchy like rainbow colors. You also notice like before when we were doing layer, the feedback isn't really making it into this triangle here because we're layering it on top. But if we do things like blend or blend needs like a low number here in order to be kind of interesting. But let's go 5. Yeah. You see the black parts kind of like destroy the feedback going on. But in diff, that doesn't happen. It just, you know, it can exist inside of the triangle. It can like flow outside of the triangle, and it's just, that handles this pretty well. So that's a pretty good one to pull out. And so all this is pretty cool, but we haven't really touched on how to get fractals out of this yet. And the answer is we need something to make it self-similar, right? So we need some sort of mirroring or like a way to repeat it. And one way to do that is literally just to say repeat. And there you go. That's technically a fractal. It's pretty noisy at parts, and we could probably do layer, and that would be a little bit better. But yeah, you see it. The triangles repeated all the way down. And if we like crank this up a little bit, it might be a little bit more, kind of clear how many triangles there are, because it's like all this down here is just all triangles. And it's kind of small. We can set the resolution to a little bit bigger because the projector is like goofy. So that makes it a little bit more crisp. But yeah, and this isn't a repeat itself isn't too interesting. There's definitely cool effects you can get with it, but probably the more interesting like default one is kaleidoscope, and that's where it really gets fun because it kind of flows. And like if we kind of try to zoom out a little bit, it might be more clear kind of how this is a fractal. And I guess like scale in itself also kind of does the repeat thing. So that is part of what makes it a fractal, but yeah, like the kaleidoscope effect on top of everything else is kind of makes it a more interesting shape to make a fractal out of. So that's a really fun one, and you can really play around with that as like, you know, go back to blend and try to find the right kind of tuning that you need in order for it to be enough. I wonder if it's more. Yeah, like you kind of want it to be a little bit like take up more space with blend so that it overlaps, and then you really start to get kind of interesting patterns that emerge. And that's like really kind of the point of all this, is that there are sweet spots at the edge of chaos and just kind of like boring nothingness, where you get like the interesting emergent designs that are surprising, and you really can't think about them, you just have to find them. Right? It's hard to be like, yeah, I'm going for this exactly. It's kind of a pretty unpredictable. One of the things that is also kind of good to touch on was I wanted to kind of show that if we take some of this out, slow it down a little bit. You can add your own functions in Hydra. And so once you're kind of bored with all of the really cool and awesome stuff that already exists here, you can just like start to get into building your own things. And so the thing I wanted to show is this set function. And this is pretty advanced stuff, so like don't feel bad if you don't understand what's going on at this point. But this function is sort of a way to do repeat that we showed earlier, but mirrored, right? So instead of it being like side by side the same thing, and it'll probably be easier if we do this, go back to this way. Whoa. I don't really know why that's showing through and not, that's super interesting. Yeah, so this mirrored repeat, let's actually just kind of strip it all down and go back to here. So if we're doing like a shape, it's easier to see with a triangle, and it's kind of rotating over time. If we just do the normal repeat, they're kind of like stacked side by side, exactly how they are. But if we do this, use this mirrored repeat that I just copied and pasted, which has some GLSL that defines that, and that's like shader programming stuff. You see it's actually like a mirror on each side. And the thing that I've found is that this mirror, when you kind of throw it into feedback, is a little bit more, a little bit more interesting than like kaleidoscope or we just have to find the sweet spot for this particular one. Let's make it bigger. Or give it some color. More color. Slower. Let's make the whole thing rotate. Let's just get rid of this shape altogether. Yeah.
That's nice.
But yeah, so I'm not really sure what it is. It's just like something about it just makes the coolest shapes. And yeah, you can just play with it, like doing stuff onto the feedback itself, like outside of kind of the texture that we're blending into the feedback, can make like interesting things happen. And if we do like scroll and rotate, you kind of just get an infinite like variability. Like scroll in particular kind of makes these harsh lines that you'll see kind of going around. So it can be good to maybe just like have one harsh line and not have it move. Rotate's really cool. You can also like do some of the more normal Hydra things like modulate rotate with some noise. And that might start to get some interesting things going on. But yeah, it's kind of just a matter of like finding the functions that you like in here and just trying them out and finding these cool spaces. There is this one that I found. It was one of the first fractals I found in Hydra. And it's just this cool like tree of life thing, and it's like on the like ground and foreground is they're all just this tree, and that is just, you know, the things that we're talking about here. We're inverting, we're scaling, a little bit of scroll, a little bit of rotate, and some kaleidoscope, and you get this kind of like pretty like common, like this tree of life thing shows up in like a lot of like you know, like indigenous and pagan, like early humans. Like this is kind of a core part of humanity, is a lot of these fractals. It's like they're strung throughout history. It's kind of important to when you find particular patterns to try to find what its like source is, because a lot of this has sort of like in a lot of settings has like religious meaning to people, and you don't want to kind of like trample all over that by using it in your fun algorave like party. But they make, you know, pretty incredible things to look at. Like it's just kind of infinitely visually pleasing. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. I was planning on spending the rest of the time just kind of going around and helping people and get set up and find cool spaces and do some more hands-on stuff. So if you have laptops and want to pull them out and try to find some fractals, we can go hunting a little bit.
The mirror function
Phoneless.
you found on the website, right? Your documentation.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's before we do that. I want to just plug this real quick. I have a website. It's emptyflat.sh. I have like just some of these are broken, but I have like a link of just like a bunch of Hydra sketches. So like if you need examples, a lot of these I find fractals, and you can pull it up, and the code looks like this. But if you just like copy and paste the link that it's loading, that is the Hydra source for it. In this case, I commented out what I was doing, and this is how I kind of explore sometimes, is use like mouse X and use interactivity to find the right sweet spots for these things. But also the mirror function that I used, that I copied and pasted from here, this is a script that I load in almost every one of my sets. It is just a collection of Hydra utilities that I found useful, and then also kind of some of them I stole from the Hydra Discord, and yeah, if you want to use that, you can. It's on my GitHub as well, and in the live code sessions repo. And yeah, that's basically it.